Introduce the two people that are on the panel. We have Terry Conlon. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn, follow him. He's a lot of interesting perspectives around loss prevention, security, and crime prevention through environmental design. Terry is the director for RFC Security Group. He's also the award-winning author for SIPTED Paradigm, and he's a founder and president of the European Institute of Crime Prevention. And we also have Gavin Moran. Gavin Moran is head of operations at the Plaza Group. Gavin has more than 16 years experience in forecourt retail, and he has a very, very unique perspective on the challenges that a lot of staff, retail frontline staff, are facing at the moment with antisocial behaviour. We're seeing a huge rise on that, and a lot of people don't want to work in retail because they're worried. They're genuinely worried that someone is going to come in and they're going to assault them, they're going to shout at them, and it's not a good environment. So these amazing guys are going to talk about something that's really topical at the moment, and every retailer, regardless of what department you're in, loss prevention should be sitting within L&D in my perspective, because they work hand in hand. It's behaviours, it's how we support the teams on the front line and give them tools and resources to make them feel safe. We talked about psychological safety earlier. This is physical safety. This is a whole other paradigm. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Terry Conlon and Gavin Moran.
Good morning. Isn't this very cozy? So I'm just going to say before we start, HR is considered to be feared and hated by many people, but not as much as loss prevention and security is, so feel a bit happier knowing that. So again, my name is Terry Conlon, I'm joined by Gavin this morning. We were meant to have three, but one guy bolted because he was afraid. He's a customer of mine, so I'll be hearing all about it. But we are really excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to do it more in a conversational approach. Again, we're going to use Gavin's experience. We're going to lean on what I do in terms of my work across the water in the US. We're going to discuss the mitigation measures, the threats, the vulnerabilities, the risks that are evident in retail and how it's growing. And again, Dale touched on it earlier on, a big part of what I do is the holistic approach to crime prevention, understanding the demographics, understanding where the problems are coming from, both internally and externally. And it's really important to understand the source of the problem before you go and try and achieve your goal of mitigating or ultimately displacing that problem. And we will talk about that. So when we displace something as a business, you're really essentially pushing it to your neighbour, but that's all that you can do. But the more opportunity for conversations and communication, you're certainly going to help alleviate that locally and maybe even nationally as an organisation. So for people of my vintage and maybe older, I'm not Michael Aspel, this is your life. We do have a few questions we're going to get through. If that went over anybody's head, don't worry about it. So we're going to kick off with our questions here. We do have 15. Again, I'm going to put my glasses on. So, Gavin, how has the nature of retail crime evolved in your opinion over the last 5 years, and what threats do you see on the horizon as of today?
I suppose the last since COVID, it's become very physical. It's become staff are getting assaulted. I won't say assaulted, getting verbally assaulted on a daily basis. You've got gangs of youths coming in shops at the time. They know there's staff around and they're overrunning stores or whatever. Thankfully, we also in our bigger sites have more management present across the site, so retail and public are maybe not out. But if you're on some of the smaller sites where there's only two people on leave shift and they're down and in, it's very difficult. How to deal with that?
Okay. And how concerned are employees in terms of that, and how does it impact their day-to-day duties in the job?
Because we're now living in the camera generation. Phones in effect straight away. You can't do this, you can't do that. I know my rights, and filming and the rest of it. So it's about empowering our colleagues on how to deal with that, giving them the skills, and having a good relationship with our local guards. It's a massive priority because they will help where we possibly can. They are also stretched to it's working with them and working with our colleagues to make sure they're safe in the environment. We always say, listen, your safety is paramount. Everything else is secondary, your safety is paramount. So if it comes to it, let them go.
Yeah.
It's not working.
And I think when we chatted yesterday, we talked about that cross collaboration and how important it is. So again, the guards are kind of overwhelmed and under-resourced in so many parts of the country, in the cities in rural Ireland. So how do you overcome that challenge and bridge that gap between your own internal structures and protocols and then embodying or talking to the guards and collaborating with the guards and getting the buy-in, so to speak?
Well, community policing is a massive resource, and obviously that's not available everywhere, but where it's available, it should be accessed and used. We had a situation in one years where we got an antisocial behaviour at night time, there was car racers coming in, there were revenue cars, they were doing all sorts, and they were taking over car parks and arresting. The local residents got sick of the noise every single night, and rightly so, because they live there, it's their neighbourhood. So we set up a meeting, we got the community guards in, we got the sergeant in, we got the residents committee in, we all sat down together on what can we do to make this better, what can we do to remedy this. We installed more ramps, we put in more signs, the guards themselves committed to coming around more regularly in evening time. It was always 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night when it was happening. It wasn't happening in the main course of the day when lots of people were around. And that has had an effect. It's definitely had an effect. But what we did was we showed the local residents that we were committed to make things better for them. Because they are customers.
And were they involved in that process?
Yes, yeah, they were there at the meeting with us, and they were there, and then they themselves had committed to then contact the guards more regularly because they were getting frustrated that they weren't actually contacting the guards. And the guards with the data to back it up, to give more resources. So then they started looking at the direct line and they went to the help desk and get the register. So it did work out.
Yeah, and you found obviously having that communication with the residents,
yes,
obviously facilitated and made it a lot easier.
Exactly, because as I said, they are the customer of the store, so they need to see that we were supporting them in this thing. We also had we did duty care to our colleagues, we did duty care to them, but we also had to prove to them that we were concerned about it. It was affecting us and it was affecting them.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we're in Q4 now, leading up to Christmas. But of course, throughout the whole year, with organised retail crime on the rise, and it is year on year. Where should retailers focus technology, people, and policy to make it a serious impact? What is the best course of action?
People first. Empowering people, training people. We've done a lot of work on it. We're training our team up and we're giving them the knowledge because there's a fear of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. So 9 times out of 10, they get team members and they're just looked at away because they don't want to get involved, they don't want to engage. So what we're doing on our side is that we also have supervisors and managers present at all times. But when we approach somebody who is shoplifting or whatever, we bring in our team members with us. They're just purely observational, so they hear and listen to what's going on, so they get the experience of understanding what can be said, what can't be said. But we've had situations where families are sending kids to rob different things in the shop. They're over-ordered food in a different part of the business, and then the kids come back putting it all into the handbag. So we just go and say, look, that's not been taken, and he's getting paid for it now.
Yeah.
And just hand it back. But we have to approach. These things have to walk at the door. We can't walk at the door where we stop.
Yeah, it's consistent. I think when we spoke yesterday, we spoke about it, and I see it so often. And again, it's free to implement. We spoke here last year for REI in terms of the culture and controls and compliance measures. So we often talk about displacement and pushing that issue elsewhere away from your business, so whether it's antisocial behaviour, physical threats, losses in terms of your shrink. When we understand the leadership and how powerful leadership can be, we talk about the training and ongoing education, but understanding those controls, which are the security measures put in place to detect and prevent crime, and then those compliance measures that we talk about and security become synonymous with. It's the auditing, the penetration testing, obviously championing people that are positive on what they do and encourage them, but also we've got to learn to take retrospective and disciplinary action when people fall short, and again make that very, very clear. So how do you strike the right balance between customer convenience and again robust physical security?
9 out of 10 customers are honest. Do you know what I mean? So you can't tar in the same brush, but you learn to read body language. We're training people to learn to read body language. There's certain key aspects. You see people around. If you see somebody with a full basket at 7 o'clock in the evening and they're like, it's all confection and minutes, you're like, you know where that's going on. And so you watch that. Now, we had a situation one yesterday on one of our sites. He walked in, he filled his basket, he looked at the supervisor and ran out the door. And she went up. But she got the register, got the details of the car, and we pass it on to the details. So they're brazen out, they're numbers of course. And what the thing is, that supervisor yesterday, all she did was got the details of the car. She did nothing else. we got the details of the car, we rang the guards, we logged the call, we got the footage downloaded, it's there now, that case will be followed through. He is a local, he will be spoken to, because in that particular area we had a lot of issues, and we're trying to eliminate the issues because it's been, I suppose, the previous management teams have let it happen. They haven't reacted, they just turned their eye, and it became, I think, a culture of turn down.
Okay. So just looking at the stores individually, how aware are the stores aware of what their shrink allowance is, what shrink allowance actually is, and how important is it to have that information and work towards it?
Each store manager gets the information on a weekly basis because we can see from scan margin versus the actual accounts margin versus we're looking at what we're doing, we're looking at what's coming into the back door versus what's going through the tills. You're doing the analysis on it and you're looking at that and you're giving that hard. I break it down into man hours. I tell them to pay, if you can reduce this, I'll give you extra man hours because you won't be losing out, you're more profitable. So then they go back and it helps the manager then focus the team because they say, well, we get more man hours, we can do more things. And so, because we're all here to make money, we're all here to, it's profitable, that's what it's all about. But at the same time, the colleagues have to feel that if they do all the extra steps, they will actually have, I suppose, more hours available to them.
Okay, so outside of the normal stock counts, which may be every 16 weeks or annually in some cases, or never in some people's cases, how aware are colleagues of particular targeted items within the store itself, whether it's alcohol, whether it's protein, baby milk, whatever seems to be targeted within that store, and how quick would they be to pick up on that if there was a trend occurring?
So we do high value statistics every single week. And the rule of thumb is if you're out by more than 5 SKUs, you're recounting the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And then I carry spot checks myself on it because in my previous role, I would have found there was a lot of internal theft taking place because of your dates and those sort of things. And if you're doing your checks, you then spot it. But then it's important that the spot check is observed by team members, that I walking up the street and start spot check and stuff, that they know that it's not just down to the manager and the supervisor that it is being looked at, but also that if there's a problem, because I always say to the manager when I read reports, 10 is fine because that's a case, that's a key error. When I start seeing 2s and 3s constantly coming through, that tells me that there's an internal problem going on here, and I start focusing on that. So it's just by showing the managers and empowering them to look out for the trends, to look out for the 2s and 3s, and look out for those different things, because we become complacent by it. So it becomes a task sometimes, but the task, yes, has to be completed, but at the same time, if you're not following through, well then what's the point of doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. So what role does staff training and awareness play in preventing theft and violence compared to investment in physical security systems? So again, we alluded to in the beginning, culture, control, compliance measures. Some people believe that if you stack up a lot of cameras everywhere and put a security guard in place, all their problems are solved. How could you elaborate on that?
Well, I suppose as we talked about yesterday, I had a situation in a previous role that I had where we had a particular event on and it was a robust crowd coming through for that, so I would have hired in security to, as I felt at the time, to make the ordinary patron coming in on a daily basis a safer journey for them coming in the store. But 3 of my customers came and, why do you have security? We never had security before. Why is there security here today? And I explained the situation.
The fear factor.
Yeah, but then one person said, I hope it's not going to be a permanent thing. I said, no, it's just for this weekend. How events happen this weekend, this particular crowd coming through, because we've got them coming through on top of the other crowds, that we have to make sure we're trying to keep everything right. And it would put me off coming here, is what it said. And then it made me retrospectively thinking, I just coming with the approach to fix a problem, but actually then in turn create another problem that I didn't think that the customer who was very honestly coming into the store to have food as a transaction, like they weren't, and then we rethink the situation. So yes, physical security guards are needed sometimes. I was in a store only last Saturday in a town in the Midlands, and I was getting coffee, and I said to the barista, says, do you always have a security guard here? And she's like, oh yeah, the whole time. I said, I wouldn't expect to see a security guard here. And she goes, you'd be very surprised what you see around here at times, but they were in their full security vests and all the rest of it. But it just threw me out because I didn't expect that to have food with my kids, and then I was getting a coffee and I was like, oh, then maybe we you think of it, she said, look, she goes, it's 9 out of 10 is never a problem, it's usually get every time, but they had put physical security guard in, but they were using for other things other than just standing at the door.
Yeah, of course.
Lending around the store.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. So I worked at a retailer in New York 2 years ago, and we had issues with antisocial behaviour. And the issue around the store itself wasn't targeted at the store, but you may have seen it if you've floated around New York or Chicago, if you've ever been there. We have what's known as transients or unsheltered or homeless people, and they hold the door open and close it for people when they leave the store. Again, they've no malice in terms of what they're doing, but it causes issues for the store in terms of staff not feeling safe. These individuals had their friends with them, so they were hanging around outside the store, and it just gave an unsavoury look to the store. The store had taken it upon themselves outside of their budget to put a physical security guard in. Of course, the individual that was opening and closing the door was maybe making $150 a day, so he saw the security officer as somebody that was going to take his livelihood away from him. So straight away became an issue of agitation, aggression, and an even more serious issue for the store. So based off the threat assessment, the vulnerability assessment, and the risk assessment, we looked at a redesign of this particular store. The budget wasn't going to be there for the security guard long term, and the cost of what we implemented was 3 months the cost of a security guard was a redesign of the door. And I've shared this openly and publicly, not naming the business itself, but we removed the opening and closing traditional door and replaced it with a revolving door. So essentially removing the opportunity for this individual to open and close the door without having the significant cost or the knock-on effect of aggression and agitation, which again, it was easy to track commercially because you're looking at the tills ringing or not ringing. So in the US, it's really easy to get crime demographics, unlike it is in Ireland, for the streets in your line and CSO. But over there, it's really easy. But what we can rely on are facts and figures. And when the tills are ringing again and people are making money, there's a direct correlation between the individual being displaced from that store, the staff feeling safer in terms of the safety and perception survey, and the tills beginning to ring and the bottom line being affected. So I look at crime prevention, SEPTA, or crime prevention through environmental design, physical security, as not only a crime mitigation tool or displacement tool, but as a business enabler. So when you create safer spaces, safer environments, your customers feel safer, linger longer, your staff remain in their positions or in their jobs, and you're far more likely to recruit new staff because the people that weren't travelling to that store to make purchases before are now returning because they feel safer shopping in the store. If you go into a pub in certain parts of the country, in certain parts of Dublin, and you see sawdust on the ground, for me that's a concern. It's not for any other reason than for potential health and safety or because the pub is synonymous with acts of violence, and that's the reason that they have sawdust on the ground. Gavin alluded to it as well, physical security guards, having armed police in certain areas 24/7, it may create the illusion of a safer space, but there's a reason that it's there. So it's really important we take that kind of stuff on board. So moving on now, we look at how important is collaboration between retailers, Garda Síochána and community stakeholders in tackling crime, and we've spoken about how important that is. And I've been lucky enough to bridge the gap between the guards and businesses that have had a difficulty in opening up that conversation, because it's a case of, okay, you're the guards, fix our problems. Well, what are you doing? So when we come to the table and we have a conversation around what we can do, how we can improve, what investment we're making, whether that's through people or through finance, then you have a far stronger opportunity to get some bite back or some feedback from the guard. So in your perspective, you've clearly had some experience in this and the benefits of it, and maybe just elaborate a bit more on what you've done there.
Yeah, I suppose look at the guards, it's their job. Their job is to prevent crime and protect us from it. But they will make recommendations, and they've done it with us. And if you don't implement the recommendations, if you don't take on board what we're saying, well then you're not really showing that you're really serious about fixing the problem. But if you implement everything and work with them, collaborate with them, because they're like ourselves, they're there to do the job, and they get job satisfaction out of low crime rates and all that. So they're targeted, the way we're targeted, KPIs, is crime rates and all that sort of an area. They don't want areas being overrun or whatever. And genuinely, the guards are brilliant at what they do. Yes, they're stretched, and if you work with them and help them, they'll work with you what possibly can. And look, we have it from antisocial behaviour to drive-offs, thefts, whatever. And I'm across the country, so I see different parts of the country are brilliant, different parts are not so good. And sometimes it can be where you're in the wrong, your store's in the wrong geographic location where you're fixed. there's a small garage station attached to that, and they haven't got the manpower to help you. But literally 5 kilometres that way, there's a garage station with 20 cars, and they could help, but they can't because it's not your jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So you've all those things to weigh up and factor in. So like we have had an issue with drive-offs across the country, and we've had good places and bad places. We're about to start a trial on other sites where we go total prepay.
Okay.
Because we're trying to see, because the guards themselves said we can't help you because they're where we are is a substation, and they just, we can't help you. We physically don't have the manpower to go and chase down these drive-offs for you, so it's something we're doing that. But my main thing would be that if the guards are working with you, work with them and collaborate with them, because they're not the enemy. They want to make things right as well. And if you work with them, they work with you, and it will foster a good relationship.
Sure.
And with your community groups as well, because I know for a fact that 9 times out of 10 the offenders are known to your team members. Your colleagues can tell you who they are, where they live, what they do, and that makes the thing easier than to help collaborate with the guards. You notice the person, you notice who they live, help, and they will work with you.
So on a national level at the moment, just going off the questions for a moment, where are you seeing the hotspots nationally at the moment, anywhere in particular?
Obviously, the closer to Dublin you get, it just geographically the way it is. The closer to Dublin you get, the more it is. Thankfully, we're down south, we're Midlands, we're and the west of Ireland. So in parts of the west, there's a lot of hotspots. The nearer to Galway City you get, the worse it gets. The further away you get, the better it gets.
Yeah, brilliant. So I've done a lot of work with the guards, and Adele had spoken earlier on about that. And we had an issue in Tala, if everyone's familiar with Tala in West Dublin, where I spent a lot of time. And again, we had extra security put in the store. Did nothing whatsoever. But again, we looked at that overall holistic approach, and we understood what demographic was targeting the store. And needless to say, we spoke to the local boxing club, to the guys up there, and the problem went away straight away. So the investment that was needed for security to deal with an issue that was being antagonised by the physical security was dealt with overnight, because we had a conversation with the right people in the club that would have the right word with these people, and they never came back and caused any problems since that date, which was Easter of last year. So you can see by having that holistic and multi-stakeholder approach, it's not always the solution, but unless you have that broader picture in dealing with everybody, you have a far greater chance of success. So what ethical dilemmas arise from the use of advanced technologies such as facial recognition, AI-driven analytics, or biometrics across retail in Ireland?
I think we all see the stats there. It's fantastic, but unfortunately here in Ireland we're not there yet. Yeah. We're not there yet. We need to be, but we're not. So I know there's a lot of work been done. We've installed a system. We're trying on other sites where it picks up the reg of the car, and if that reg has offended, as they've done driving before, alarm goes off straight away. So the guys know that there's a car coming on site, so not to authorize the pumps. It's a trial we're trying, but it's not near where it needs to be. We need to have, I suppose, Mr. Vincent were talking earlier on, the UK have a great headways on working on this. We haven't got it here in Ireland yet, and it needs to come. And in terms of facial recognition, I suppose look at GDPR, as I think has mentioned quite a bit, but we need to move past that, because if we don't, we're not going to move forward.
Yeah, so even on the technology side, you see a lot of security officers wearing body cams because they have audio. What we're seeing at the moment, and it's not new, a lot of retail colleagues are wearing body cams, and that's kind of shocking to think that in certain stores, in certain cities or certain areas, that colleagues 18, 19, 20 years of age, because of threats of violence against them, are forced to wear body cams, which again can impact on the commercial value or the experience of the store, because if you see a colleague wearing a body cam, your immediate concern is going to be why. In this particular area obviously has serious issues, so there's a knock-on effect there too. So how has the increased focus on customer experience shaped the design of retail security measures? So how important is that customer experience and not creating any friction when it comes to, again, making sure retail is tight with security?
Look, we're all trying to do things better. We're all trying to get one on our competitor to be better at what we do. That's why the retail market in Ireland it's just grown so much, because we're always trying to outdo each other, trying to be better, and we're ahead of the curve in a lot of places. In terms of in-store, we're now building displays down so we can see the whole store across. We're not putting stuff near the entrance of the store, stuff further back into the store, because displays, as and then don't get me wrong, they're lovely and all the rest of it, but they're going to make it easier, like when you've got a customer walking in, lifting a full case of chocolate and walking out the door, sure, that's the whole display gone, like you've made no money in that display, so what's the point of the display, like, so you have to bear that in mind, and you have to also look at, I suppose, make sure that your customer experience is not hampered by your controls in store. So it's about observation, it's about watching the customer come through, that there is that member of staff that will be on the floor. So generally we will have supervisors on the floor, the cashiers on the tills, and the supervisors move around, but the cashiers are to make contact with the supervisor, it's eye contact and all that sort of thing, so they all know what's going on. You know.
Yeah, and there's a fine line. So again, if you've been to the US, even the Target or Walmart, they clearly have an issue with people stealing links or deodorants because they're behind glass cases. And you may often have to spend 5 minutes or 6 minutes waiting for a colleague to come. So it creates that friction as a customer. But if you ask for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, they'll hand them to you and you can walk out anyway. So if you want to steal, you can still steal. But again, there's that fine line between physical security measures and the friction of a customer. Because if you want to buy something and you have to wait 2 or 3 minutes, you're typically going to walk to the next door or leave. And if you receive the product and your intention is to steal, you're going to walk out anyway. So there is a fine line between both customer service and security. So what role do perceptions and psychology play in security? Does making security too visible deter crime or simply make customers feel unsafe? And we kind of spoke about that from the work I've done. Again, I worked in Durham, North Carolina, and what you said about the physical security, they had cops on the same street 24/7, one at one end of the other. That was great. And the locals were like, no, this is not great, this is a serious issue of gunfire. So you can see for people that live in that area, there's a concern around having too much physical security, too much law enforcement, because the reason for that. So as somebody working within a business, are you conscious of that fact, that the fine line between protecting assets and obviously as businesses we need to make money to keep moving forward?
Yes, you are. I said it at the top today, colleague safety is paramount. Once the colleagues, because like retention, we're talking it's more retention, I suppose. If you can't get people to work the industry, you can't get people to work in your store, well, you can't operate your store. So their safety is paramount. And then after that, then we're looking at what you can do to protect the business. And it's about weekly analysis. It's about looking at what got stolen, where was it placed, how many staff would work at the time. You have to look at all the factors, including the environmental factors outside. Like, was it dark and evening? Because the winter months makes it much easier for them to move in around sites, because you can be hiding in bushes, you can link around outside. So we operate, most of our sites are 24 hours, so we don't actually have that physical closing down. Where yes, we go to hatch and all the rest of it, but you don't have the same where you're physically locking up a store. So in my previous world, we had a store that was constantly getting broken into, the windows getting smashed at night time and they broke in, but we went to put in cash guard and it still broke in, so it made no difference. So we spent the money, put the system in, it's a great system and it worked really well. It was for the safety of the colleagues in the store that we put it in, and in my time I've had that store and it was broken into 3 times. And the windows were smashed, and the windows getting replaced wasn't exactly cheap. But we had done everything we could physically do, but our colleagues felt safe in the store. They knew that they had no access to cash, everything was time locked, everything was away, so if they come in, and even cigarette machines were always kept closed and locked, and keys were never on display or around, because like that, it was easy access to it. But we still had different things, and the reason why that particular store was constantly getting hit was that, again, it was a densely populated area, but the guard station was a substation, and the next station was 20 minutes away. And they knew that, so they knew they had 20 minutes to get away for the guard from your store, so they knew what they were doing. And so unfortunately, you are at the loss at that sometimes. But the thing is, you need to make sure that your colleagues feel safe, that they feel that you will listen to what their concerns are and work with those concerns. Because if you don't, it's not going to work.
Sure. How can data such as shrink reports that we spoke about earlier on, incident mapping, predictive analytics, be better used to drive smarter security decisions, in your opinion?
Again, use the data, read the data. There's no point in having all these others, of course, but you don't actually sit down and read them and analyse them and share the data. Like, it's one thing the operations people know or the management know it, but if you don't share that right down to the ground, that this is happening, we lost it on stock or this is gone, then why would they care? Right? When you actually point it out to them, and I always break it down back down to euros. We lost X euros today because of this person doing this, so we need to be more observant. and don't create a culture of blame. Don't, because if you do that, then straight away they'll feel, sure, I'm getting blamed for this, like, it wasn't my fault. So it's about around, I suppose, everyone being part of the solution and working together to collaborate together, but use your data and share it. Like, and that's why I said the weekly controls are massive. I'm massive on them, like, because I have seen firsthand when they're not done what can happen. And I can tell you right now, when you go into a store and you find a mess and you start digging and digging and you find a bigger mess, you're thinking, oh my God, how do we get to here, like, I mean, so, yeah.
And it's such a knock-on effect. I'm not sure if anybody's heard the term food desert before, but it's quite large in the US, where a Walmart will typically go into a town and they'll have a pharmacy, they'll have groceries, and all that kind of stuff, and the local businesses close down because they just cannot compete. And what happens then, Walmart is targeted by criminals, and essentially Walmart decides to withdraw from that particular town, leaving no access to groceries or medication. And if you're not lucky enough to have a vehicle or access to transport, you're now precluded from accessing that food and medication that you need. So hence we come up with the term food desert. So there's a huge knock-on effect for the community, for employment, for reputation, for all of those things. So it's really, really important that we look at security, loss prevention and crime prevention holistically from the perspective of empowering people, from driving the values of the local community. That's what we talk about, territorial reinforcement and the ownership. Really, really, really important. And that's where you see a lot of public art. I'm a big advocate for public art when it comes to local governments, where it's very, very unusual for you to see graffiti take place on a wall that has beautiful public art on it and is designed specific to each area. So there's always a targeted approach to crime, whether it's through graffiti, antisocial behaviour, theft, whatever it's going to be, but it's important all the stakeholders are at the table and we understand the dynamics behind it. If you could change one mindset or long-standing belief about retail security within the industry, what would that be and why?
I suppose the simple answer to that, like, is that the basics are doing right. Just focus on the basic stuff and look at your stores. Not a term we use in the business, how do you manage bite-sized chunks? You don't get overwhelmed by the whole thing. I'm looking at 13 sites, I'm not looking at one site, I'm looking at 13 sites, but I look at each site individually and pick out that site and I work at the management structure in that site to fix what the problems are, put a plan in place, we work around that and then we move it on. And then sometimes I can cross-pollinate good ideas, sometimes it's a regional thing, like, so you can only work in that particular region, but you go back to the basics, do them right, and it's about your training, your development of your people, development of managers, empowering them to make the right decisions and empowering them to look after their own site, because if they know the benefit of it, that they'll see the bottom line, and then working with the local Gardaí and all this, but also developing those people on the ground and enhancing their experience, because remove that fear from their job. If they feel fearful, what can you do to protect them? What can you do to make that in? And if it's installing screens, if it's panic buttons, we've had mobile panic buttons out that wear on their neck, whatever it is to make them feel safer in their job, but let them know what you're listening to them, but let them also by you listening what you want them to work with you to fix the problem.
Sure, and I think that the message and the philosophy around today is some of it around people first is really, really important from a security point of view also, because most of the time people are the threat, but people are a solution also. And I think if we get that buy-in from colleagues, from businesses, from all of the stakeholders, we have a far greater chance of initially displacing that issue from your store. So whether that's, we're mainly talking about external threats at the moment, but those threats are magnified internally as well. So understanding, we often talk about the fraud triangle, the pressure, the rationale, the opportunities. If a colleague or a manager in store has 2 out of those 3, there's a likely scenario that somebody is potentially committing fraud within your business, and having that intelligence. A lot of stuff that's stolen from stores is sold online on Facebook, facebook.ie, done deal, old school, around the pubs, door to door. It does take place, and the people you hear this back from are colleagues that work in the store. They might be selling some fashion apparel, football jerseys, software. The information you feedback from is from the staff in the store, and if they feel comfortable and confident to share that information with you, that's the most powerful information that you can actually get, that you cannot quantify, because it's so important. So That's us for this afternoon stroke this morning. If anybody has any questions for myself or Gavin, we are very, very much open to taking them now or afterwards. But for now, Gavin, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
I'm just curious from a retail point of view, the big problems that we've hit on there are antisocial behaviour, discrimination, wrongful arrest, all of that. And one of the earlier speakers spoke about having staff members of 63 different nationalities. How do you deal with the cultural differences, let's say, as to how things are dealt with in other countries compared to here when you're trying to address that problem? I know, for example, that in certain countries, if you're caught robbing, the police in a different country will deal with that in a different way. You get staff from other countries who feel that they value the job that they're after getting from their employer, and they will protect it at all costs, to the point of even going after the individual, exposing themselves to the customer's injury. So how do you deal with those, and ethnic groups, how to deal with sort of issues like that? How do you overcome those difficulties in the training of staff?
I suppose the first thing is their personal safety is paramount, and that is always the number one thing for them. You go through your training with them. There's as I call it, textbook training, and then there's the everyday life training. And the everyday life training is dealing with those sort of people that you're talking about. And they are everywhere, and they are the biggest cause of a lot of the antisocial behaviour in stores. And I always say, if they're in shouting, they're shouting for a reason. So straight away, if you need to start looking around the store because they're trying to distract you from something else that's going on. And that's why, but the people from different nationalities, they soon pretty pick up how things run. They haven't done long here before they kind of see it. And it's your training and your parameters around what they can or can't do, and make it very clear that you will support them at all costs, but their safety is paramount, the safety of their colleagues is paramount, and at the end of the day, if no one's safety is worth whatever they're taking on the day, you just have to recuperate a different way or go on and make the call to local Gardaí. But the piece we always do is we do make that call to the Gardaí, we do put the footage out to the guards, and we do get them down to get a case opened. And like I said, the example I gave yesterday, that particular individual was from the locality, so we found out exactly where he lived. So all stuff was given. Yesterday, the guards had all the information, and they were going to that person's house yesterday to challenge them on it and to take the next step further. We have to go the next step because we're trying to, in that particular store, we're trying to stamp out the culture of just walking in, taking what you want, and walking back out again. And we're without putting in full-time security and closing the shop off to the normal everyday customer.
So I knew you couldn't ask a question about any defamation, so thanks for that, Joe. But from our point of view, it's probably slightly easier because we've over 1,000 employees that are security officers, and we do have cleaners as well. From a security point of view, the guys are licensed, so there's a standard there in terms of the expectation, the requirements. Now, the caveat to that is we do have some training bodies still in the company, and I spoke to Vincent about this morning, and they're less than ethical when it comes to some of the training that takes place. So the onus is on me and us as a company to make sure that the training that they receive is the correct and appropriate training for the site that they go to. So whether that's retail or construction or corporate, they have to understand the jurisdiction they operate in, the expectations and the law. So we do have the licensing for it, but again, as a business, it's up to RSC and for me to make sure that they receive the additional training to make sure that we mitigate any potential disasters that could take place.